Do you ever look at one of your urban sketches and think, it's just missing a little something, but you can't quite put your finger on what? Or maybe you can't get something quite right and you're just not sure how to change it to improve it next time? Hi, I'm Emma and welcome to the channel, or welcome back if you've been here before. Today I thought I'd share a few simple ideas and tips that have helped me improve my sketches. They're all really easy to try, and some of them I have mentioned in previous videos, but I thought it would be a good idea just to put them all in one place. And please do let me know in the comments if you find these useful and if you've got any tips up your own sleeve that you'd like to share. So let's go through them, starting on the drawing side. An area that I've sometimes heard people mention that they've struggled with is drawing windows and doors and making them look believable. And to quote an instructor on a workshop I recently attended, you can't have too many lines around doors. Well, obviously you can, but being sensible about it. If you look at a door frame or a window frame, it's made up of lots of layers, lots of pieces of wood, possibly more than we realise. So adding a few extra boxes around them can make them look more 3D and more convincing. Children sometimes draw houses with just a square box with square windows with a cross in the middle. So adding a few extra lines can really avoid them looking like that and instantly improve them. And another thing that I like to do is I put a slightly thicker line underneath the frame and just inside the frame that's on the further side away from me. So if I'm looking at a window from this direction, for example, then over here I'll put a slightly thicker line, and that just gives the impression that it is 3D. It's a solid object with a bit of shadow and slightly inset. So that's something else that you might like to try. I don't always do this on windows that are in the distance and you can't see very well, but windows that are closer to me, I do like to make sure I put several lines around them and a little bit of shadow inside. If you sometimes struggle with getting angles right, there are a couple of ways that you can help with this. The first way is to hold a pencil or pen up against the angle. So maybe it's a roof. Just hold it up alongside it and then either move your pen down, keeping that angle down to your page, or move your page up to your pen or pencil. This can help you to visualize it on the page, but it can be a little bit tricky and it's quite easy to drop your pen or drop your sketchbook. So another way, and this is something that I've mentioned in quite a few of my videos, but I find it so helpful to visualize a clock face. And that really helps you to see the angle. If you imagine the hands of a clock, where the angle would appear. Once you've got your main angle, so say it's your main pitched roof, it's then easier to get the other angles around it more accurate by looking at the shapes that they form. Maybe it's negative space or maybe it's another roof behind it. But have a look for triangles and other shapes, and that can often help you to get other angles right. Of course, if you really want to get your angles accurate, you should start thinking about applying perspective, 2 or 3 point perspective. And I do have another video which I'll link to up here if you'd like to look at that. But I'm not going to go into that for the purpose of this video. This video is about quick tips. If you've watched any of my previous videos, you might have heard me say the phrase, if you see a muddle, draw a muddle. And what I mean by that is, if something is too far in the distance or in a shady area and you can't see it properly, don't try to make sense of it. Just draw a muddle. So for example, these chairs and tables under this canopy here, I know they're chairs and tables because, well, it's a bar or a cafe, but also I actually walked past them slightly earlier. But looking at them, I can't really make sense of them. They're stacked chairs and tables, but I can't see them clearly enough to draw stacked chairs and tables. But just a few lines, well-placed lines, will trick the eye into knowing what they are, and your brain will fill in the rest. But I actually find it surprisingly difficult to draw a complete random muddle. Somehow my brain seems to want to make sense of it and finds it difficult to completely randomize it. So a technique that I've found helps me is to use a continuous line. So if we look at this scene here, around the boats in this boatyard, there were loads of ropes and cables and all sorts of things that I couldn't see properly, and I probably wouldn't know what they were even if I could. So to draw a muddle, I just drew a continuous line. And it just gives the eye enough of an impression to know that there's stuff there, even though we don't necessarily know what that stuff is. The next tip relates to walls and roofs and anywhere where you've got a large expanse of what would be potentially the same colour and could end up as a boring block of the same colour. What I like to do is to just draw in some random bricks and tiles, just a few in certain places. Now, some people like to draw in every brick and it looks really, really effective. I approach it slightly looser, and so I just draw a few in to hint at it. And this will avoid a big block of one colour later. And I've got another tip in this area, which I'll come to later in the video. And my final tip for the drawing stage is, once you've finished your line work, assuming you want the lines to still stay in there and be part of your final sketch, just go over the important ones with a slightly thicker line. Don't overdo this stage, otherwise everything will look flat. But if you just do it on the important parts that are closest to you, it can really make them stand out and be a bit more prominent. Moving on to the painting stage, a couple of tips about colours. First, shadows. When I first started to add shadows, for some reason I was quite cautious about it. My shadows were quite tentative. But if there's a big shadow there, don't be afraid to put it in. And when you put it in, instead of just using grey, try adding just a little bit of blue or a tiny bit of purple, and it just stops them from looking flat. And while we're on the subject of colour, again, if you've watched some of my previous videos, you will probably know that I hate sap green. I don't find it very natural. I find it quite artificial looking. Now, of course, we can mix our own green using blue and yellow, but this is about quick tips. So if you want to very quickly make sap green look more believable, more realistic for, say, foliage, add just a tiny bit of red, not too much, just a little bit. And each time you dip your brush in to reload it, just change up the ratio of green to red a little so that you just get a slight variation, and that will really help to bring out the texture. And this also applies to brick walls and roofs and other big expanses. As I mentioned earlier in the video, if you want to add a little bit of texture to them, as well as drawing in a few lines to hint at bricks and tiles, try varying the colour each time you dip your brush in. So for example here, this wall was made up of, I think, yellow ochre, Payne's grey and one of my browns, I'm not sure which one. But each time I dipped my brush in to reload it, I added, say, a little bit of the Payne's grey, and then the next time I added a little bit of the yellow ochre. So each time it's just a slightly different colour, and that again just gives it a bit more interest and a bit more variation than just using one colour. When you're drawing trees and foliage, draw in a few leaves here and there. That can really help to add some interest and, break up large areas. Well, I hope you found some of those tips useful. And like I mentioned earlier, if you've got any tips of your own, please do leave a comment. Thanks for watching and happy sketching.